remember the first time I realized my dad wasn't going to be the kind of father I'd imagined. I was 7, sitting at the small kitchen table of our modest suburban home in Ohio, trying to eat my breakfast while he barely glanced up from his newspaper. The smell of toast and scrambled eggs mingled with the faint scent of motor, oil from his work clothes. I remember thinking, he doesn't even notice me. It wasn't that he was cruel, at least not in the way you see on TV. There were no raised voices, no slamming doors, just a quiet absence, a constant invisibility that made me feel small, as if my very existence was optional. My mom tried to compensate, of course, her hands always juggling dinner, laundry, and my homework. But there's only so much one person can do, and the gap left by my father grew wider with every missed bedtime story, every forgotten recital. School was my sanctuary. I loved the smell of crayons, the scratch of pencil on paper, the way my teachers looked at me and smiled when I got the right answer. It was the first time I felt seen. But even in the classroom, there was an underlying fear, a whisper in the back of my mind. No one's coming to cheer for me, not really. My classmates had dads who clapped loudly from the sidelines, who drove them to soccer practice in the pouring rain. I had the neighbor's cat sometimes if I was lucky. I learned early that I couldn't rely on him, so I relied on my brother. Jason was 5 years older than me, tall for his age, with a mop of unruly brown hair and an easy laugh that could chase away the shadows. He noticed things, like how I'd curl my fingers nervously when I felt ignored. He'd pat my shoulder, whisper a joke, or sneak me a candy bar from the pantry when Mom wasn't looking. He was my protector, my silent champion. In a house where my father's attention was scarce, Jason became my anchor. Our weekends were simple. While other kids went to theme parks or out for father-daughter days, we built forts in the living room with couch cushions and blankets. Jason would make me laugh until my sides ached, reading stories in silly voices, turning mundane afternoons into adventures. It was in these moments that I learned something vital. Family isn't always about biology. Sometimes family is the person who shows up, consistently in the ways that truly matter. Of course, there were moments I tried to reach out to Dad to bridge the gap. Birthday mornings, I'd tiptoe into the living room, clutching handmade cards and drawings, hoping for a glance, a smile, a scrap of acknowledgement. Most times, he'd murmur a distracted thanks, eyes glued to his phone or newspaper. Once, on my 8th birthday, I stood at the top of the staircase, waiting for him to carry me downstairs. Like the storybook princess, I imagined myself to be, and he didn't. He stayed in his study, and my mom gently nudged me down, forcing a smile as I waved at the empty doorway. That day, something inside me quietly cracked. Yet, despite the disappointment, life moved forward. Birthdays came and went. Holidays were celebrated with love, but always with a subtle shadow where he should have been. I became skilled at compartmentalizing, at tucking away the ache of wanting my father's approval into a corner of my heart where it couldn't bother me too much. But even as I learned to cope, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling, this absence will follow me into adulthood. It wasn't all loneliness. Some memories shine bright with warmth, like the time Jason and I camped in the backyard, under a sky so full of stars it felt like the universe had spilled itself just for us. We whispered secrets into the night, made promises to always have each other's backs, and in those moments, the absence of my father felt smaller, almost irrelevant. I carried those nights with me, tucked into the folds of my memory, as evidence that love could exist, even without a father's hand to guide it. School projects, sleepovers, soccer games, Jason attended everything. He clapped when I scored my first goal, cheered when I got an A on a science project, even stayed up late helping me memorize lines for the school play. And he never once let me feel inadequate or unseen. Meanwhile, my father's presence remained inconsistent, a fleeting shadow at best. At family dinners, the contrast was stark. Dad would sit at the head of the table, phone in hand, barely participating. I'd glance at him, hoping for a shared joke, a fleeting smile, a nod of pride. But the moments were rare and fleeting. I remember one Thanksgiving, looking around at the laughter filling the room, and feeling simultaneously loved and invisible. Jason caught my eye and winked as if to say, "Don't worry, I see you." And that was enough, at least for that moment. By the time I reached high school, I had developed a quiet resilience. I excelled academically, threw myself into extracurriculars, and built friendships that mattered. But in the background, the unspoken void lingered. I knew somewhere deep down that when it came time for milestones, graduation, prom, perhaps someday even a wedding. My father's absence would be impossible to ignore. And yet, even with all the early heartbreak, I didn't harbor resentment. Not fully. I understood in some way that he was a product of his own limitations, his own failures, and that my life didn't have to be defined by what he couldn't give. I had Jason friends and a mother whose quiet determination taught me the value of showing up, even when it was hard. Looking back now, those childhood memories, both the ache and the joy, shaped me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. They taught me to value consistency over titles, presence over promises, and love over obligation. And as I imagined my wedding day years later, it was these lessons that quietly whispered, the right person doesn't always come with a bloodline. Sometimes the right person is the one who has been there all along. High school hit like a wave I wasn't quite prepared for. Suddenly, life became louder, faster, and more complicated. There were cliques, parties, social media profiles to maintain, grades to worry about, and hormones turning every emotion into a tidal wave. And through it all, my father's absence remained a constant undertow, pulling subtly at my confidence. I remember freshman year vividly. I had signed up for the school newspaper, hoping to find a place where I belonged, where my voice mattered. The first meeting was in a cramped classroom, with posters peeling off the walls and a faint smell of old coffee lingering in the air. Everyone else seemed confident, already chatting about article ideas and deadlines. I felt like a shadow, quietly picking at the edges of my notebook. Jason noticed my nervous fidgeting. He leaned over, whispered, "Don't worry. You'll find your footing." That simple sentence, so unremarkable to anyone else, felt like a lifeline. It reminded me of those backyard camping nights, of the times he had my back when I needed it most. With him there, I could breathe. Without him, I might have shrunk further into myself. At home, the routine was familiar yet exhausting. Mom worked long hours at the local library, juggling checkouts, late-night events, and homework help. Dad was largely a silent presence in the background. Sometimes he'd appear in the kitchen, sipping coffee or scrolling on his phone, offering a quick nod or grunted greeting before retreating again. There were rare moments, fleeting, when he tried, like attending a parent-teacher conference, but even those felt obligatory rather than heartfelt. I had a small circle of friends, but I often noticed how my peers had dads who were deeply involved. They'd talk about weekend football games, movie nights, or shopping trips. I listened, smiled, and nodded, all while a quiet sting settled in my chest. By then, I had become adept at hiding disappointment behind a polite smile. I told myself it didn't matter. I have Jason, that's enough. But teenage years have a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Social dynamics became increasingly complicated, and I was painfully aware of how my father's absence shaped the way others perceived me. Group projects, family-centric school events, even casual comments like, "Did your dad teach you that?" felt like invisible knives. I learned to deflect, laugh, or simply retreat into myself, but inside, a subtle loneliness festered. One particularly difficult moment came during a winter school dance. The gym was transformed into a sparkling winter wonderland, twinkling lights, paper snowflakes dangling from the ceiling, music pulsing through the floorboards. Friends paired off and laughed, swaying to slow songs. I stood near the edge, hoping someone would ask me to dance, but the moment passed. My chest tightened as I glanced at the gym doors, half expecting my dad to appear and escort me in some grand gesture. Of course he didn't. Jason, noticing my discomfort, sidled up beside me. "You don't need him," he said gently. "You've got me. Let's make this fun, okay?" And just like that, he extended his hand. We danced awkwardly at first, stepping on each other's toes, laughing so hard we nearly fell over. In that moment, surrounded by shimmering lights and the hum of music, I realized that belonging isn't always about the people who are supposed to be there. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to show up. Academics were another battlefield. I was determined to excel, to prove my worth, not to anyone in particular, but to myself. My father's lack of engagement in my life had instilled a silent pressure to succeed, to create a reality where I didn't need validation from him. Long nights hunched over textbooks, coffee-stained notebooks, and endless drafts of essays became routine. And through it all, Jason acted as my sounding board, my editor, my cheerleader. His feedback was honest, sometimes brutally so, but always rooted in love. Sports offered another kind of refuge. I joined the soccer team during sophomore year, On the field, there were no judgments, no social hierarchies. There were just goals, passes, and the exhilaration of movement. My teammates became a surrogate family, cheering each other on through wins and losses. Yet even here, the absence of a supportive father figure was palpable. While other girls had dads cheering from the sidelines, waving signs and shouting encouragement, I relied on Jason, who had become my personal MVP. He attended every game he could, clapping loud enough for both of us, giving me that boost I craved. Relationships in high school were tricky terrain. I had crushes, first kisses, and awkward confessions. With each one, I confronted a gnawing anxiety. Would he ever be proud? Would he ever show up when it mattered? This anxiety bled into my relationships, making me cautious, hesitant to trust fully, always bracing for disappointment. Yet paradoxically, it also sharpened my sense of empathy. I became attuned to the emotions of others, understanding what it meant to feel unseen, unheard, or undervalued. One late-night conversation with Jason encapsulated the heart of my teenage struggle. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor, textbooks spread around us, a half-eaten bag of chips at our side. "I hate him," I whispered, staring at the carpet. "I hate that he doesn't care. I hate that I even need him to." Jason reached over, ruffling my hair. "You don't need him," he said firmly. "You've survived this long without him, haven't you? You're stronger than you think. And someday, someone will walk with you who actually wants to." I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time, but those words lingered. They planted a seed, a quiet hope that the future could look different, that I could define my own version of love, support, and family. By junior year, I had learned to compartmentalize emotions more effectively. I excelled in school, joined clubs, took leadership roles, and even started a small volunteer project at a local community center. But the shadow of my father's absence persisted, a quiet echo in the back of my mind. At night, when the world was still and the house slept, I would sometimes imagine the wedding I hoped for someday, the image of a father figure escorting me down the aisle. The thought would twist painfully, half longing, half dread. Yet through all the turbulence, the unwavering presence of Jason remained my anchor. He was there for scraped knees, heartbreaks, and moments of triumph. He offered guidance, laughter, and silent solidarity. In those formative years, he became not just my brother, but my guardian, mentor, and role model. I realized slowly that the family you're given isn't always the family that matters most. Sometimes, even as I approached the end of high school, that quiet realization became a mantra. Presence matters. Consistency matters. Love matters. And as I glimpsed the horizon of adulthood, I carried with me the lessons learned from these teenage years: resilience, self-worth, and understanding that absence doesn't define love, but presence does.